Okay, as she said, my name is Caroline Locke, and I am a student here, and I'm majoring in Women's Studies and Social Work. And so for my part of the presentation, I'm going to give a brief overview about International Women's Day, just some history behind that, and I have a video. And then I'm going to tell you about Madre, the organization that we are raising money for. So first off, I just want some information about International Women's Day. This was a video that was published by Russia Today, and this is just a little information about how they celebrate in European countries. Okay, so that was just a little information about how they celebrate in Europe, and that's actually pretty common, not just in Russia, but in several European countries. So just some brief history about how it actually got started. As I said, it started in the early 20th century. Early 1900s, there was lots of social and political unrest surrounding women's rights, labor laws, suffrage, different issues surrounding women's rights. So in 1908, 15,000 women marched in New York City. They demanded shorter hours, more wages, and women's suffrage. Then in 1909, the Social Party of America declared National Women's Day, which was observed countrywide on February 28th. And this is the first instance we know of like a National Women's Day, which kind of gave rise to what we have as International Women's Day. So in 1910, they had the Second International Conference of Working Women in Copenhagen. Someone from Germany, Claire Zetkin, proposed an International Women's Day to highlight their demands for equality. And this is just a quote from the International Women's Day website. 100 women from 17 countries, representing unions, socialist parties, working women's club, and including the first 3 women elected to the Finnish parliament, greeted Zetkin's suggestion with unanimous approval, and thus International Women's Day was the result. So International Women's Day was born out of this Conference of Working Women to further women's rights. So in 1911, the very first International Women's Day was honored in Austria, Denmark, Germany, and Switzerland on March 19th. There were rallies for women's rights and different workshops on how to gain more social rights for both men and women. Less than a week later, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire that is famous here in America killed 140 women. So we did not celebrate it that first year, and that kind of drew attention to the need for women's rights, for labor laws, etc., and that kind of sparked America's interest in International Women's Day. In 1913, International Women's Day officially became March 8th, which is what it is still today. Russia observed it first in 1913 when it moved to March 8th. And so this is an interesting tidbit, kind of what ties it back to the video I showed you about Russia. So in 1917, women striked for bread and peace due to the millions of Russian soldiers who were in World War I. And they were protesting against World War I and specifically their involvement. So it was mostly women, and they were on strike for 4 days until the Tsar at the time abdicated from the throne, and the interim government gave women the right to vote. The strike began on February 23rd on the Julian calendar that Russia was using at the time, which worldwide we were using the Gregorian calendar, which was actually on March 8th, International Women's Day. In 1975, the UN declared that year International Women's Year, and now it is an official holiday in several countries: Afghanistan, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Burkina Faso, Cambodia, China, Cuba, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Laos, Nepal, Russia, Tajikistan. As you can see, there's lots of countries that it is a holiday in, and several of them are for women only, meaning that only women celebrate the holiday. So as you saw in the video, the tradition sees men honoring their mothers, wives, girlfriends, colleagues, etc., with flowers and small gifts. In some countries, it is the equivalent or better than Mother's Day, and small children will give presents to their mothers and grandmothers. Today, International Women's Day has many local and national events. There's political rallies, networking events, government-sponsored events, crafting, theatrical and musical performances, speeches, parades, and marches. And the theme for 2014's International Women's Day, declared by the UN, is inspiring change. So So that was a little bit about International Women's Day and why we're doing this. So next I'm going to let you know about Madre, which is the organization that we chose to raise funds for. And there is another short video about what Madre does. So that was just a quick little overview about what Madre does, and I'm going to get into some more detail about that. But first I want to just give you a brief history. First of all, this is directly from their website, and this is what they say that they do. This is kind of their mission. Madre is an international women's human rights organization that works in partnership with community-based women's organizations worldwide to address issues of health and reproductive rights, economic development, education, and other human rights. We provide resources and training to enable our sister organizations to meet these goals by addressing immediate needs in the communities and developing long-term solutions to crises they face. So I'm just going to give a little bit of history and how Madre came to be and what it is today. To understand why Madre came into being, you need to understand kind of the global context of what was going on when Madre came into being. Madre was formed in response to the Contra War that was happening in Nicaragua, and this is just some basic information. I didn't really know a lot about it when I was going into it, so I just put this on here. In 1979, the Sandinistas, which was a left-wing group of revolutionaries, overthrew the government of Nicaragua. President Reagan feared that group would spread communism and its ideologies to surrounding areas, which would put pressure on America. So in an attempt to contain the influence, Reagan aided governments where unrest had spread. Opposition to the Sandinistas sprung up in Nicaragua, and then Reagan openly funded the Contras as an attempt to halt the Sandinistas. So he aided, kind of gave money. America was responsible for perpetuating a war in Nicaragua. So in 1983, a group of women, activists, poets, artists, teachers, and health professionals visited Nicaragua to see the consequences of this war. And they saw massive devastation of daycares, clinics, schools, and various other infrastructure and local organizations that helped women, and they were really out of resources because it had disproportionately affected these women. They wanted to draw attention to these problems worldwide. They wanted to put pressure on countries around the world to see what was happening and to stop funding wars and imperialistic ideas that hurt women in the long run. So Kathy Engel, who was a poet, founded Madre and was the executive director for 5 years. And Madre, like they said, means mother in Spanish, which reflects the native language of Nicaragua, where Madre began. One of the major players in Madre that made it what it is today is Vivian Stromberg. She became the executive director in 1990 after teaching for over 20 years in New York City. And I just thought this was a great little story from her website, from the Madre website, about why she joined Madre. So I'm just going to read this little excerpt. It was the eve of the first Gulf War. I was leading a discussion with 6th graders about the impending war. This was the South Bronx. Many of the children knew people being deployed to the Gulf as U.S. soldiers. Asked the students if they thought there might be a class of kids in Iraq like themselves having a similar conversation about the coming war with their teacher. One young boy looked at me with disbelief. He raised his hand and said, "But Miss Stromberg, there are no children in Iraq." I knew then that I had to be at Madre full time. I had to put all my energy into political work for the children in Baghdad, in the Bronx, everywhere. So this seemingly innocent conversation really spoke to her and made her realize the urgent need for help in places like Nicaragua, where they were, but in other places where the U.S. was involved, like Iraq. She saw the partnerships in Nicaragua were strong and saw them how helpful they were, and she felt that they could expand to other parts of the world, particularly the Middle East, which actually got her into Madre. And they eventually expanded into parts of Africa, and she's credited as one of the driving forces that kept Madre alive and successful and became the organization it is today. So now I'm going to give you information about Madre today. Madre works in various ways to meet the needs of the community. As I said in the video, they provide immediate needs such as food, water, shelter of families in the community where they're working. They partner with women's organizations already present in the community. So they don't go in and create setups like camps or base of operations. They go in and they work with local organizations that have sprung up, usually organically, in response to the needs there, and they just go in and give them support. They advocate for human rights globally and also educate the public at large. They have three main ideas that they focus on when they choose programs to work with or countries to work in. And these are women's health and violence against women, which at first these seem like they're unrelated, but they're very closely intertwined. Women's health is affected by violence, and violence is sometimes sparked by women receiving medical care. Withholding medical care is an act of violence, and violent practices like female genital mutilation directly affect a woman's sexual, reproductive, and mental health. So violence and women's health are very closely intertwined, which is why they group them together. Peace building, that one's kind of self-explanatory, and environmental and economic justice. And these are both also intertwined, and they overwhelmingly affect women. Women grow most of the world's food and may lose their livelihood if the environment is threatened and doesn't allow them to grow the food that gives them their jobs. And millions of women get their income from the environment, and protection of the environment and economic gain seem to be at odds at times, but are closely related, and that's how Madre sees it. Madre, as I said, does not have offices in the locations that they support. They do not bring in outside experts. They work in existing organizations and network to meet the individual specific goals of the region. So like I said, many of the organizations that they work with were already there. They just give them resources, skills, and support to help them stay in the community and grow. I do believe that sometimes they will go in and help set up organizations that meet the needs, but they always put local women and local leaders in charge and then give them support to ensure that these programs will empower local women and continue many years after Madre is no longer working in the region. As I said, Madre was originally founded to help relieve areas affected by Western imperialism, war, and unjust government policies. So they refrain from enforcing Western ideas and goals and focus on meeting the needs of local women. They don't go in and say, this is what we think that needs to be done. They go and ask women what they think needs to be done in their area and what will help them the most. And this is another quote from the Madre website. By working in partnership with Madre, our sister organizations are able to build programs based on their own initiatives and perspectives, while benefiting from the resources, training, and technical support that a leading international women's rights organization can provide. Madre is currently working in 12 countries, which are listed here: Afghanistan, Bolivia, Cuba, Colombia, Guatemala, Haiti, Iraq, Kenya, Nicaragua, Palestine, Peru, and Sudan. And as I said, each thing that they're doing in those countries is different. They don't do the same thing in Peru that they're doing in Cuba because each community has different needs. And these are just a few examples of the programs that they're doing right now. They're giving funding and resources to an underground escape network for women in Afghanistan, supporting Commission of Women Victims for Victims to help provide girls a haven from survival sex work, which is young girls will exchange sex in order for basic survival needs like food, health care, or cleanliness needs. And they give them medical help, counseling, and basic needs so they don't have to resort to the survival sex work. And they are working with midwives for peace to provide better midwifery practices for women in Israel. These are just a few of the many, many projects Madre helps support and what they're currently working on. Each country can have 5 or even 6 or more different projects in each country. And a lot of the times they start projects, like I said, that have already been there, and they help fund them, and then they move on. But that doesn't mean that they stop giving them support if they need it. But they think that the women are handling the best they can. So you can actually go on their website and see all the different projects they're working on right now, and some that they have been working on in the past. And if you want to know more information, I got most of my information from Madre.org, InternationalWomen'sDay.org, and then about the Contra Affair from BBC News.
Hi everyone, I'm Tyler, and I'm going to be talking about more specifically what we are doing and Guatemala as well, since that is what we're supporting. I just started off with some basic information about Guatemala for anyone who may not know. It's in the southern central America. Its official language is Spanish, but it has about 40% of the population speaking Amerindian languages, so there's a large indigenous population here. Its population is about 14 million as of a 2013 estimate, and its current form of government is a constitutional democratic republic, and you will see why I say current in just a moment. I've got a brief history or chronology of Guatemala. Mainly, I wanted to make the point that it has had a lot of problems with colonialism. As you can see, beginning in the 1500s, they were conquered for Spain. But the most important event I want to point out is the October Revolution. And that was a civilian military movement. It removed the dictator Jorge Ubico from power, and it installed a reformist, kind of leftist, more liberal government. And I have the reforms they established right here. As you can see, established a new labor code, created Social Security, granted suffrage to women, and they passed agrarian reform, which is really important. And Guatemalans enjoyed these benefits for about 10 years until until big companies got involved. The agrarian reform laws that they passed essentially said that the United Fruit Company had to accurately represent their taxes, which they had been misrepresenting for years. And it also would have made its subsidiary, the International Railway Company, pay about $10.5 million in back taxes. And so basically this was seen as a threat to corporate holdings, and it ended up with the CIA backing a coup in 1954, and that is basically what resulted in the Guatemalan Civil War. In the Guatemalan Civil War, the government was accused of committing genocide against the indigenous population, and approximately 100,000 Mayan women and girls were raped and or murdered during this time period. And an estimated 1 million Mayans are displaced due to this very long-running conflict. And this is a major source of the violence women experience in Guatemala even today because of the indigenous displacement and just general political unrest. So, gender-based violence, another word for it is femicide, or women being murdered because they are women. It is the most reported crime in Guatemala, and it's the most reported every year. Approximately 40,000 complaints are filed in Guatemala every year, and unfortunately, it's estimated that that's only about 10% of them. It's estimated that 90% of cases of violence against women in Guatemala go unreported and therefore uninvestigated. But now I'm going to move on to, Caroline already gave you a good overview of Madre, but I'm going to talk more specifically about the campaign we're raising money for. It's the Blow the Whistle campaign. Okay, and I just got this from Madre.org, and it says, in the past decade, nearly 5,000 women and young girls have been murdered in Guatemala. Many of them, including girls as young as 10, were tortured, raped, their bodies left in public places. As a result, women have coined the term femicide to describe these widespread gender-based killings committed with impunity. And of the 383 women's murder cases in 2003, more than 300 are still awaiting results from police investigations today, a decade later. And in response to this rampant femicide, women in Guatemala are starting to do something about it. They're organizing to protect one another. And this wonderful organization, the Women Workers Committee, it was formed, and its activism stems from a response to this violence. And the funds we will raise today will provide whistles and flashlights for the Women Workers Committee's neighborhood watch groups. And now we will kind of meet, and I'll tell you a little bit about exactly who we're helping. And I got all of these off of the Madre website. It was founded in 1997 to combat workplace violations against women in the sweatshops in Guatemala City. However, it does fight for women's rights on and off the factory floor. Right now, the Women Workers Committee is focusing on Barcenas. It's a poor and marginalized community on the edges of Guatemala City. And they advocate and work towards a variety of specific issues within the community. And they work to advance the rights of women and young people through programs that promote health and well-being. And I'm going to talk about those programs. So the first thing they do is health care, because women and their families in Barcenas have little to no access to dental care, health care, that sort of thing. So what What the WWC does is it provides a safe space and supportive space for women to discuss sexual and psychological abuses, since unfortunately that is very commonplace. And they also run educational programs for young men and young women that are focused on sexual and psychological health. And as Caroline mentioned, women's health care and violence is very closely related, and they are working to provide better health care for women who may not get it otherwise. But the issue they were founded on was, of course, labor rights. And many women in Barcenas, they migrate to Guatemala City to work in the sweatshops there. And in those sweatshops, labor violations and labor rights violations are very common. So what the Women Workers Committee does is they host workshops to educate women about their rights as workers, and they also document workplace violations against women, and they pursue legal remedies for these women. So they are kind of like a legal advocate, as well as providing health care and literacy. Spanish is the official language of Guatemala. However, as I said, about 40% of the population speaks an indigenous language, and Spanish is often a second language for many indigenous women. And the WWC provides Spanish courses and computer literacy courses for anyone that needs them. They're open to men as well as women. And the WWC has this wonderful partner organization called MUICSIL, and forgive me if I mispronounce that, but they work to fight for the political, economic, and cultural rights of the Ixil and other indigenous women. Their main issues are food sovereignty and the weaving cooperative. And as you can see on the handout, MUICSIL works to advance food sovereignty in El Caché, where hunger and malnutrition are prevalent. And in partnership with Madre, they provide chickens to indigenous women. And what this does is it not only improves their health and well-being through readily available protein sources, but it also provides them with a sort of stable income, because the meat and the eggs, and I suppose you could even breed the chickens, and sell them at local markets. And then the weaving cooperative also serves a mainly economic purpose, but they are working with women from the Ixil community so they can share and preserve their traditional weaving practices. And it also serves to strengthen community and the culture, as I said. But also, they are working to standardize goods so these women can get a better market value for their things that they make. And that is another way which they contribute to kind of the economic rights of indigenous women. But the big thing, and what we're mainly raising money for, is the Women Workers Committee and community safety. And so, as I said, in the past decade, there have been thousands of women and girls murdered. And in Barcenos, there are no streetlights and no reliable police presence, so essentially no police presence. And many women who work in the sweatshops are often forced to work until after dark. So these women are walking home alone in the dark, and that's incredibly dangerous. And what the Women Workers Committee has done in response to this is made these neighborhood watch groups, and they just go out and make sure that nothing happens to their fellow women. And what we're raising money for is whistles and flashlights as an added safety measure for these groups. And yeah, so hopefully with your donation today, we can blow the whistle on violence against women and help them lead a safer life. Thank you very much.
You said you're taking donations here, and I see whistles, but I also see you're wearing buttons.
Oh, yes.
Can you talk about
I forgot to
that?
mention, yes, of course. We have a booth down in the atrium. We'll be there till about 2. And I have yes, and tomorrow. And I have made little custom buttons as part of the fundraiser, and we have a variety down there that you can buy, and buttons are $2, but we also have a donation jar. So if you would like to stop by and get a really cool button and contribute to a great cause, please do.
We also have a board down there with some general information information, kind of what we talked about, but some more like stats and just quick facts about what we're raising money for. And as he said, that we made buttons, and some of them are like women, Madre, and feminist related, and then we just have some ones that are pretty insane cool things on them. So there's a variety of things you should come and check out.
Did you see much research about how this violence against women issue and the violence against girls issue?
Not specifically on children, but much the same that's said for women also applies to children. Because, I mean, as it said, girls as young as 10 are being raped and murdered and dumped on the street. So it obviously affects women and girls as a whole. But no, I did not find anything specifically related.
And then in places like Guatemala and several other places that Madre works, women are usually the entire caretakers, and they usually work to put their wages towards their children. So obviously, when the mothers are affected, the children will be affected. Either they'll be motherless, or they won't have money to eat or go to school. Their livelihood will be just as affected as the women who are affected by the violence too.
So, you said that there's not that much police presence and women are walking in the street light. And so the whistles, when they're blowing the whistles, then are they hoping to attract the neighborhood watch for protection? Is that who's protecting them?
Yeah, well, we're giving whistles to the neighborhood watch. So if they see something, they can call attention to it and, you know, shine a flashlight on it and address it appropriately.
They may also, Madre was a little unclear about who received the whistles. We do know that the actual watchdog group does get the whistles, but they may also give them to the women as like protection, but it's kind of like a partnership. So hopefully the workers will be watching, so the women who are walking home won't have to worry as much. I think that's the general.
And I am sure that the Women Workers Committee will hand out whistles to just the general population as well.
Yeah.
How did you kind of, I've never heard of Madre, so how did you like discover Madre and the way, did you choose Guatemala, or did they give you like a place to kind of focus on, or was that of your choice? And how could other groups that want to get involved with Madre, how would they kind of do that?
I think we were just looking at, because we were trying to pick an organization, and I think we were just looking through a list in class, I think, and we found Madre.
It's actually in our Women in Global Perspective book.
Oh, that's right, yes.
Yeah.
It was in our textbook, and it was the organization we liked the most, because they do fund individual projects based on need versus just a one issue kind of thing.
It was very important to us to find a group that considered cultural relativism and didn't go in and impose their ideas and wheels, but rather work with the women. And we were really impressed with that, because a lot of groups will just go in and be like, this is what we think is best for your community, and this is what we're going to do. But instead, each group is individualized. And I had actually heard of Madre before, not really in detail, but after hearing that they did stuff like that, we looked on the website, and actually the Guatemalan Blow the Whistle campaign really sparked our interest, because we thought it was a really clever campaign name anyways, and we wanted something that was attention-getting, so that was the first one that drew our attention. So we looked into it, and we really felt that it was something that we could directly impact, that our money would go directly to helping the women, like, in action. It wasn't just like, oh, this will go to help them get stuff, which is important, but we felt that it would be, like, directly impacting their survivability. We just thought that was really awesome. So, and on their website, they have several campaigns. They have ways to donate. You can actually buy things on their website. I think you can actually buy, like, a package of whistles.
Several different divisions.
Yeah, and there was even in addition to the Women Workers Committee, they had a sister organization as well, and I was really glad to find that out. Because that sister organization, the UXIL, I think is how you say it, is even more specific to individual need, and I thought that was really nice.
Teaching Spanish is a very interesting endeavor too. And that was something else that we had read in our textbook about women in sort of marginalized ethnic groups being kept out of the political process if they don't know the dominant language. Not just in Central America, but the other example we had with Morocco. And that's just something that we probably don't really think about in the US where English is so widespread. It could, and I don't even know that native tribes, that very many native tribes in this country operate in indigenous languages. English is so dominant. But it's a really significant thing.
Yeah, and both organizations empower women on multiple levels, social, political, economic especially. And I kind of like that as well, how it had a multitude of projects that helped on a multitude of levels. Oh, that was very nice.
Thanks so much for coming, and we'll see you next month.